Alright, so my event was about a year and a half ago. I started working at a high school in as a teacher assistant, learning support assistant. Um, and this was around the same time I started doing the dip ed part time. So a few weeks into working there, I was assigned a student in year 12 to work one on one with. His reading levels were pretty poor, so bad that he'd just been to a physiotherapy appointment and he couldn't really fill out one of the forms by himself. So I think his parents sort of found that alarming, sort of had a meeting with his house dean, and that's how it came about. So I was told just to sit with him, grab any old book off the shelf, sit down with him, and just get him to read to me out loud, and I'd sort of intervene if there were any words he was stumbling on. So this only went on for about 3 weeks because he finished school forever. Um, so the purpose was just to get his reading up to a better level as he went off into the real world. And it wasn't until about a year and a half later, just recently in one of the tutorials, I was asked to give a response to the election. It was just a delayed reaction. I was just so worked up about it. I was angry and confused, and I wanted to know whose fault it was. How does this happen? How does this kid go all through high school to year 12? So I'll be honest, everything I've learnt, everything that I know about literacy, I learned after the event. So at the time of the event, I didn't really know much about any of this. So at the time, I probably wasn't the right person to go to, and I just didn't realize the importance of literacy in the classroom. I thought it was just the English teacher's job, and I work with a woman who specialises in literacy, and you know at the time, she just was always going on about literacy and how important it was, and I just didn't get it. Like, it was almost at the point where I was just sort of like, oh, she's still harping on about this. Like, who cares? As bad as that sounds. So I found ELPCG and Tavani's book together to be very, very useful. ELPCG, just the readings and the discussions that we have in tutorials have really just opened my eyes to literacy. As I said before, I didn't know much about it. I didn't really realize what sort of how much of a big issue it was. So the unit itself has really opened my eyes to uh, just how important literacy is in all disciplines, especially for me since my teaching background's PE and design. So, I did have that initial perception that literacy just, it's not a big deal for PE and design. We're running around making stuff with wood. It's there's no need for literacy. There's no issue for literacy in these classrooms. So I found it to be very helpful and opened my eyes to that. And I struggle a lot with readings, but Tavani's book was just something that I could really easily read and relate to. And I just found it to be just like a woman telling the stories. So I found, I could go on for 10 minutes about all the techniques and strategies I've learnt from Tavani. But, for Tommy, the kid I was working with, I now know a lot of strategies and techniques about, connecting with the text, and all about avoiding strategies, and, just trying to offer accessible tests and all that sort of stuff. So I could go on for hours about that. But, I really got a lot out of Tavani's book, and I'm gonna be using these techniques for the rest of my teaching career. Unfortunately, I didn't know Tommy at all at the time, and I only had 3 weeks to get to know him. He was a pretty shy kid, so he was hard to get to know. So I found that to be a bit of a disadvantage for both me and Tommy. Just the fact that I didn't know Tommy well, I didn't know what his interests were, I didn't know what he was good at, what he struggled at. So I feel like, personally, looking back on the event, I feel like if I knew Tommy well or better, it would have benefited both me and Tommy. And I feel for Tavani because in her book she's always going to these new classrooms, these new schools where she doesn't know any of the students, and I can just already tell from reading it that within a matter of minutes she's already picking up things about the students. She's not judging them, but she's really observant and picks up on a lot of things about the students. So that's something I noticed, and it made me come to the conclusion that it before you can well, in fact I've got a quote. Um, there are three basics of schooling: literacy, numeracy, and the well-being of students. And the well-being of students unlocks just about everything. So that just says to me how important it is to know your students and to make sure that everything's going on fine with them. And speaking to one of Tommy's teachers years later, she said that you could tell that when Tommy woke up on the wrong side of the bed, he used to bring his anger issues and issues regarding like his girlfriends and his family to school. So there's no doubt that these issues definitely would have had a negative effect on his learning. One of the things we learn in social culture politics is a concept about the virtual school bag, and that's something that straight away stood out to me, and I wanted to pursue that a bit more. So I've come up with a worksheet for students to fill out on their own accord. Pretty much circle the things that they bring to school. Every student has a full school bag, but there's just too much focus on what kids can't do, having to change the way we teach because these kids can't do this. But really, we should be looking at the other angle. We should be looking, he's really good at this, he's really good at that. But really, we should be looking at the other angle. We should be looking, he's really good at this, he's really good at that, and that should be our main focus. So just coming up on screen is just an example of the virtual school bag worksheet that I came up with, and I went and got two teachers that dealt with Tommy, his housemaster and his tutor, and they all filled out a virtual school bag for Tommy. And they, all the common things that were in all of them were he was good at building things, fixing things, moving physically, designing things, creating things, adding humour, and he was interested in woodwork, drawing, athletics, and spray painting. So now I already feel like I know Tommy a lot better than I did at the time in those 3 weeks. I know what his strengths are, and he represented the state at a Australian competition for world trade skills. So he was really good at woodwork, really good at cabinet making, and that just says to me that he would have been good at reading, like they say in Tavani, blueprints, all those sort of plans and design plans. So that's something we could have worked off, and I feel like if I hadn't known this at the time, this would have helped me a great deal. I think everyone will agree that every kid comes to school with a full virtual school bag, but it's the preconceived beliefs of some teachers that other kids have things in their school bag that are of less value in the classroom than others. So, for instance, Tommy, I'm sure all of his interests and skills were probably not valued in the majority of his classroom. So we should use this to the advantage. We should, be making Tommy's interests and skills a priority. We shouldn't be focusing on the negatives and what he can't do because that just goes against the whole concept of the virtual school bag. Social politics of education has been a very beneficial unit for me. It's kind of funny because when I think back, I can't really think of things that I've learnt in social cultural politics of education. It's just been more a case of I've become more aware of things to consider in terms of cultural background, race, age, sexuality, all those sort of things are things that I didn't really think about or take into consideration, and it's not brain rocket science. It's just I've been made aware of these things through social cultural politics. And one of the readings that I found very useful was Getting Out of Deficit, and that talks about the discourses that some teachers have, and it makes me wonder if some of Tommy's teachers had discourses, and Tommy's got a younger brother in year 8 who's showing very identical traits to Tommy. He struggles with his literacy, and and he's got some behavioural issues and all that sort of stuff. So it makes me wonder, do teachers have these discourses now to Tommy's brother because he's from the same family? So it's made me realise that as a teacher, I need to engage in the discourses that are more positive and hopeful and helpful and for support, because I've come up with a quote, and we conclude that student behaviour largely mirrored the discourse model by and the expectations communicated by the teachers. So this just makes me wonder, is it the teacher's fault? Is it because of their discourses that, Tommy's year after year, he's going to end up, he's got no hope, every year is the same. Another quote that stood out for me in getting out of deficit was this one. The most important variable at school is making a difference for students is the teacher. It is the teacher's expectations, their enacted curriculum, their classroom talk, their relation to young people, and their actual ways of inducting students into specific textual practices that most affects outcomes. One of the articles I read was by Hamanus, and he talks about the reflective practitioner, and he talks about the importance of writing case studies based on our own teaching experiences, which is exactly what we're doing here in Assignment 3. And, I found it very, I know everyone that I've spoken to have found it very stressful, but also very beneficial. And I want to make sure that I do it later on in my career all the time, because there's going to be times where I try something and it's just not going to work. And instead of thinking to myself, that did not work, I know not to do that ever again. I know that now. But think to myself, all right, fair enough, I tried something, it didn't work, but why? And I think this is going to be very important in becoming a successful teacher. We need to, figure out why things don't work, and it's going to help us make improvements. Another one of the readings was Wilson and Lanson's. They discussed Sean's idea of reflective practicum, and that's sort of talking about how there's only so much we can be taught at uni. It's all got to be, well, it's not all, but a lot of it has to be learned by our own experiences out in prac, and also when we start teaching. And I've heard a lot of teachers now say, I learned nothing at uni. I learned everything in my prac and on my first year, which obviously I'm sure they did learn stuff at uni, but what I'm getting out of that is that they're learning a lot with practice. And, there's a quote here that says, there are important dimensions to learning that cannot simply be taught, and thus a practical dimension to learning to teach is seen as beneficial. So it's really just telling me that, to really make the most of your pracs and your teaching experiences, because that's where you're going to learn most. We've been taught all these theories and techniques, and now it's all about putting it into practice and learning from them.